Hello everybody, and thank you for joining this new channel that I created called Jack's Crypto. This page I'm going to use to cover many different topics related to Bitcoin and crypto in a way that us regular investors can understand. The question that I've been getting a lot lately, and the reason why I wanted to make this first video on this topic, is when do I sell my Bitcoin? Maybe you've been buying for a couple of years. Maybe you are planning on buying now and you don't know when to sell. But either way, you're probably curious, when can I sell this to get my profit this cycle? And how do I know when it's time to sell? Is the last all-time high was 108,000. Should I have sold now because it's at 95,000? Is it going to go back up? Did I miss the top? Well, I'm going to cover that today in this short video, and I'm going to show you exactly the tool that I'm going to use to make the trade at the end of the cycle. You may want to hold on to some of your Bitcoin. You may want to sell it all. That's your choice. But I'm gonna give you the tool that you need to use that will give you a long-term look on it. This is not for short-term trading. I can do another video on that. This is for long-term purchasing and then selling at the end of the cycle. I want to be very clear on that. This indicator is for selling at the end of the cycle when you squeeze as much profit out after holding long-term, whether it's buying now or you bought a year or 2 years ago, whatever it might be. So speaking of all that, let's go ahead and get into it, and I'll show you exactly what you're going to use. So the indicator that I believe is going to be the most closely related to selling at the top of the cycle is going to be the pi cycle top indicator. And what this graph shows is three simple things. Well, they're not so simple. Two of the three are complicated, but it's represented by one single line. The gold line on this chart shows the price of Bitcoin over time. The blue line shows the short-term average, okay? And the purple line shows the long-term average. So what this does is it overlays those over the graph of the price. Now, normally the long term is going to be higher than the short term, as you can see in most areas here. Most of these areas here, you can see that. But there are times when the short and the long term intersect, and during that time, the short term average becomes higher than the long term average. Let's take a look at a few examples of that and see how we can use that to indicate when we think the end of the cycle is. If we go back to the beginnings of Bitcoin, into this first run here, the first bull run going into crypto summer, if we zoom into this area here, we can see that the point where the long-term average is bypassed by the short-term, which is right in this area here, as you can see, the light blue, the blue goes over the purple. And at that time, the price was at $183. Now that wasn't quite the top because the top was 201. So it was extremely close, right? We're right here. And then it goes over on the 7th. And then the top was the 10th. So 3 days away. Same thing up here. When we look at this part here, the top of that one was here on 11:30, but they actually crossed on 12:06. So during the early days of Bitcoin, this indicator was close, but it wasn't quite dead on. However, once we go further out into, let's say, the 2016 halving, which led into this bull run here, And what we find when we zoom in is that when the short-term average crosses the long-term, right here, on 12/16, that also happens to be the top of that market cycle. You know, that cycle, that's the top right there. So that's very interesting. Let's see if that happens again. So the next 2020 halving, which led into the 2021 bull run. So if we look at this. Now this bull run had a double peak, but the second peak isn't normal. That normally doesn't happen. It happened because of different reasons, with COVID and money that was released and then reinvested. But traditionally, you only have one peak. And if we see there, the same thing happens once the short-term average goes over the long-term, right there. So let me zoom in a little bit more. So it crosses right here. So that is on 4/12. And then the high is actually on 4/13. So what we've seen here, the last two cycles, is that the all-time high came right at within mere days of when the short-term average crossed the long-term average. So what is that going to tell me? Even in the early days, they were only a few days apart, right? Even the early cycles of Bitcoin. But as we get more and more mainstream adoption, this crossing point has connected directly with the all-time high of that cycle. Looking at that, we can say, well, where are we this cycle? Well, you know, we're right here. And when we look at that, we're nowhere even close to those connecting. We still have a long ways to go. Now, based on historical halvings with all-time highs, it takes about a year to 18 months for Bitcoin to reach a new all-time high of that cycle after its halving. The halving this year was, which happens every 4 years, was in April. So that means the new all-time high this cycle next year is going to be between April and October. Well, that's a big spread. You know, when is it? April, May, June? We're not sure, right? But I believe that using this indicator can give us a good. We know when it's getting close by looking at that. Now, when do we think what do we think the price is going to be during that range? And to do that, we can look at the Bitcoin rainbow chart. Okay, this chart graphs where Bitcoin should be based on this algorithm that they use. And it started at the beginning, it tracks it all the way out to 2040. And what we see is that Bitcoin is followed inside of this rainbow, except for one part here, which was the post-COVID double peak, which was unusual. And it fell out of the cycle just slightly, out of this rainbow. But otherwise, it has pretty much been inside of it. So let's say that normally it will stay inside of this rainbow, and it gets more and more narrow as Bitcoin gets less and less volatile each cycle. What we notice when we look at this is that these cycles normally go into the orange or red at their peaks. Same thing with the last cycle, into the orange, maybe just a little touch the red. Even the double peak was in the orange. So we use the same, logic going forward. What we can do is we can say, okay, well, where is our range? Well, our range is between April, right, and October. So that tells me if every cycle we're hitting the orange, then that means if it hits the all-time high 12 months after the halving, which is the minimum amount of time traditionally, then we're looking at, if we go orange, from yellow into orange, we're looking at a minimum of $181,000 per Bitcoin, up to 248. If it doesn't hit the all-time high until October, the end of the run, well, then we're looking at a minimum of 212,000 Bitcoin up to 288,000 Bitcoin. So there's quite a range there that it can fall in, but most likely it's going to get into that orange section. Now, like I said, how do we know? Are we getting $212,000 Bitcoin when we sell? Or are we getting 180,000 Bitcoin when we sell? Well, the way to know when we're getting close, it goes back to the pi indicator. Keeping an eye on this every day and watching this get closer and closer, like it did every other cycle. The 2017 cycle here, going into 2018, the 2021 cycle, right? Each time this gets closer and closer, and we can watch it. So if you were to watch this chart week after week, you would start seeing these go closer and closer. This right here, this is 114, and then it reached the all-time high. Sorry. So let's say right in here, like this is 630, but it didn't cross until around 12, so 6 months later. Same thing here. Sorry about that. Same thing here. We're looking at 1031, but it doesn't cross until 410 or so, for April of the next year. So about 6 months later. So we're potentially about 6 months out looking at this from the all-time high hitting. Well, when is that? That's around June. Going back to the rainbow chart, where would we be at in June? Well, we're going to be around $190,000 per Bitcoin. So, two things that we're talking about here. One, when should we sell? I would use the pi cycle top indicator to tell me when to sell Bitcoin. That's going to indicate when the end of the cycle is. How much will it be at? You can use the rainbow chart to determine where it's going to be. Those are the two things that I want to cover in this video. I think right here, for long-term holds, long-term sells for each cycle, this is a great tool to use. There are many other tools to use, and I'm going to make videos about other types of charts and other ways to look at it to include short-term trading. But I believe for the long-term trades, this is a great indicator. And this is going to tell you what the price is going to be. So if you're on the rope of buying Bitcoin and you think that, according to this, like I said, June, it's going to be at 190, it's $95,000 today. So you're going to double your money. If you was to buy it today, you still have an opportunity to double your money. To me, that's a no-brainer. I'm not going to double my money on any other asset that I purchase in 6 months. So I'm not going to give you, financial advice. I'm just telling you what I do and giving you the information to make the choice that you want to make. However, based on all the data that I see, Bitcoin's going to $180,000 to $190,000 potentially, right? Even if it goes to $150,000, it's still, it's still 50% more than where it is now. And using this indicator, we can see when to sell. Because if you don't sell when those touch, then the price begins to go down. The price starts dropping, right, as the short-term and long-term averages get further and further apart. Now, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching this video. I will be making more videos covering many more topics, and hope you see you there. Thank you.